Okay. By the way, if for some reason you can't make it to the class, that's why I sent out that information about where you can find the pornographic movies. I have no idea how that happens. But anyway, how you can get either the class itself, you can go through Zoom, and that I hope every week I'll have that on there. And then after the Zoom class is over, I transfer it to the YouTube page. And I'm trying to figure out how to create a WhatsApp group. And hopefully I'll figure that out before the end of the year. Although that's a whole year from now because it just started the year. Okay.
Do you need assistance creating the WhatsApp group? Do you need assistance, technical assistance? Because it's not complicated. It's actually
I just never done. Well, I've never had to do it, so I'll figure. But I got to transfer all of the information, your phone numbers, to it, and that's going to be the only complicated part.
But anyone can do it, and then you could be an administrator too, and then you can add a post.
Yeah, of course.
I volunteer.
You volunteer? All right. If you want to volunteer, send me an email. I'll send you all the information, and you can do it. Okay, very good. We have a volunteer. All righty. You don't get any extra credit for it, though. I'm sorry. Okay. But that's a very convenient way of contacting each other. All right. Okay. But getting back to Sukkot, when you look in the Torah, there are 3 pilgrimage festivals. We call them Hebrew Shalosh Regalim. The 3 Regalim. Regal really means a foot. Regalim means in that usage of pilgrimage, the 3 pilgrimage festivals. These were the 3 holidays that one was supposed to go to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, when the temple was built, to celebrate. So it begins with Pesach. The biblical year of listing the holidays always begins with Pesach, Passover, Shavuot, and then Sukkot at the end. But of course, the way the world works today, we generally think of it more of Sukkot as the first of the holidays because of how our calendar is organized. All 3 of them have both historical allusions and agricultural. The agriculture may have even been older than its appearance in the Torah. The holiday of Sukkot is the end of the harvest season. We understand that. We see that. And certain elements, as we'll talk about it, are very clearly come about as a result of it being a holiday celebrating the harvest. Historically, the rabbis assume that it's the Sukkah that we are supposed to live in, which again we'll talk about later, represents the Sukkot, the booths that the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, lived in when wandering in the wilderness for the 40 years, and or the cloud of God's presence over Israel during that time. Passover, Pesach, again, it's the time of the wheat harvest leading into the barley harvest. And then Shavuot, 50 days later, is the completion of that harvest season. So they all have their agricultural aspects, and Shavuot, I'm sorry, I didn't mention, is seen as the time of giving the Torah. So Exodus, Torah, and wandering in the wilderness. Now, Sukkot has certain elements to it that are unique. Each one of the holidays have certain unique qualities. Right now, I want to just touch on the universal aspects of all of them. I'm sure I spoke about it, or maybe Rabbi Allen, then we talked about the laws of Rosh Hashanah. But there is a major distinction between the Sabbath observance, how we observe Shabbat, and how we observe Yom Tov, the holidays. And that's described by the rabbis as Ochel Nefesh. we are allowed to do what is necessary for food preparation on the holiday. On Shabbat, which we'll go in more detail when we talk about Shabbat, we're not allowed to cook. We're not allowed to prepare meals or from the cooking level. On Yom Tov, we're allowed to. Now, so we can use fire to cook, but we're not supposed to kindle a fire on Yom Tov. So we light our fires before the holiday begins, and you can transfer flame from one place to another. Electric ovens and stoves and all of that become issues, how you regard it. So I do not turn on and off, but I would turn up and down an electric stovetop that was already on Yom Tov, not on Shabbat. Okay? Similarly with the oven. And a lot of ovens today have what they call a Shabbat mode, a Sabbath mode. If you get a new oven, they have a Sabbath mode. What does it mean? Most ovens now are designed that they go off after 12 hours. That's a safety feature. You can override it by using the Shabbat setting, so it can stay on all of Shabbat, and or you have a Sabbath setting use on Yom Tov, which is whatever temperature you got your oven on, you keep it low when you're not going to need it. You want to cook, you put your food in, and you push the temperature numbers. I want 350 oven, and eventually it decides to turn on. It won't do it as soon as you tell it. You can't know for sure when it's going to do it. That's what we call grama. But you're not supposed to turn it down. So you have to make sure your food's in the oven. You want to keep it warm, then you can turn it down. A cooktop stove as well, whether it be the gas or the electric, as long as the food is on the heating element, you can turn it down so it doesn't burn, and then take it off and it's at a lower setting. Similarly, while on Shabbat, we're not supposed to carry in the public domain. Again, like everything, you don't understand laws of Shabbat, but I have to say laws of Yom Tov because that's coming up, and you have to know the end of the story before the beginning. But anyway, theoretically, we're not supposed to carry in the public domain on Shabbat. You are allowed to do so, according to most authorities, on Yom Tov. Okay? Again, there are differences of opinion to some extent on that, and we will talk more about that when we talk about Shabbat, the idea of the Eruv, and the whole idea of what constitutes what in English we call work, what in Hebrew we call malacha, the 39 categories of activities that are not permitted on Shabbat. But driving to this grocery store or to the golf course, going fishing, those things are not permitted on Yom Tov. Theoretically, if you know how to shech the chicken and you really need it to do it, you could shech the chicken on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, not on Shabbat. All those fall into the category of ochel nefesh, activities necessary for you to have food available. And especially since we have 2 days of Yom Tov, that makes it even more necessary. You go back a few hundred years without refrigeration that we have today, you can understand even more so. Today, there's some say, well, maybe we shouldn't be allowed to do this anymore. After all, we put the stuff cooked before, put it in the refrigerator, pull it out, and warm it up when we want it. All right? But for that, nobody's been able to convince the Jewish housewives that that should be done that way. Mm-hmm. So that is the major difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov, is this idea of ochel nefesh. Similarly, when it comes to lighting the candles, on Shabbat, when do we light candles Friday night?
20 minutes before the sun sets.
20 or 18, different opinions. Usually we say 18, but 20 is also an accepted number. Okay? I would never count that wrong. And then there's some communities actually even earlier. But since we're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat, And since we're supposed to say the blessing before we perform a mitzvah, before we perform the action, there's a problem. Because lighting the candle is using a flame. That's the mitzvah, to light the candle. But how can I say the blessing? Because when I say the blessing, I've now accepted a Shabbat. I can't light the candle. So traditionally on Shabbat, the Ashkenazic tradition, this is not the Sephardic, the Ashkenazic tradition is however number of candles you light those candles. Then you cover your eyes so you can't see them. And you say the bracha, the blessing, Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvotav V'tzivanu Lahadlik Ner Shel Shabbat. And then you move your hands and you see the candles, and sort of that's saying the blessing before the action, as it were. That's not really the case on Yom Tov. And so many of the authorities say that really for Yom Tov, we should say the blessing first and then light the candles. And unless it's Shabbat and Yom Tov together, in which case Shabbat overrides Yom Tov. Yes?
I would like to clarify. Yom Tov, from my understanding, Yom Tov is wishing a person.
Okay. In Hebrew, we refer to holidays as a Yom Tov. Okay? And in Yiddish, for various reasons, it becomes Yontiv. Yontiv. The M sound becomes an N. Don't ask me why. There's some explanation about language that could explain it. So frequently you will hear people of Ashkenazic background, even if they're not Yiddish speakers, will say, I have a good Yontiv. Good, like in German, good. Yontiv, good day. All right. Hebrew, also another name for it is Chag. And so in Hebrew, Chag Sameach, a happy holiday. So all of those are terms. I will give you a list of various terms and things to help you out later at some point. Okay. So now, let's look at Sukkot. The name of the holiday already tells you something very important about the holiday, namely that we have Sukkot. Didn't mean to do that. Thank you. You're welcome. We're told in the Torah that we are supposed to live in a sukkah for the 7 days of Sukkot. Sukkot. Okay. What is a sukkah? The sukkah essentially is a flimsy hut that has a minimum of 3 walls. The roof has to be made from natural elements, branches, palm branches, whatever like that. You cannot use something that is a utensil. If you got a rake, you can't throw the rake on top of the sukkah to help make the sukkah. And the common name for that roofing is chach. Schach. Yidach at the end there. You're going to have to learn that. Those of you who don't know how to clear your throat yet, we're going to learn how to clear our throats eventually, okay? The schach is the roofing. That is the most important element. Right? So we're told that your structure, we'll come back to the walls in a minute, has to have a roof that is made up of branches, of twigs, of bamboo, smaller planks of wood that is thick enough that during the day, when the sun beats down on it, the shade is greater than the amount of sunlight that comes through the roof. but it should not be so thick that if it were to rain, you stay perfectly dry. Okay. So we started the roof, and then we have, according to the Talmud's understanding, you have to have at least 2 full walls plus a portion of a third. So we call it 3 walls. Ideally, you have 4. The walls can be made of just about anything. And some people will use the side of their house as one of the walls. Some people have a freestanding sukkah. Some people have a canvas sukkah. Until this year, since now I'm living in a condo and I have to worry about dealing with the sukkah that we got there, I had a sukkah that was made up of fiberglass. That over the years kept getting smaller because the walls broke with the wind, and then I didn't replace them. Okay. So really almost anything, but the walls should not be so flimsy that they flap back and forth. So if you use canvas, it should be kind of tight. And that ideally becomes your home during the holiday of Sukkot. Now, that's very easy for the most part if you live, say, in the land of Israel. Land of Israel this time of year is usually pretty nice, the weather. Rain hasn't started falling yet. The hot summer is over. Pretty nice most of the time in the Sukkah. Then you go to the late Middle Ages and the early modern era, and you're in northern Poland, in Lithuania, or Iowa, where I spent 4 years. And you can have snow. I sat in the sukkah in the snow. So obviously that's really not doable to make that your home. Ideally, it becomes your home. That's where you spend most of your time. You're supposed to eat all your meals in the sukkah. Whatever you do during the day, you're supposed to do in the sukkah. But reasonably, because of the reality of the world in which we live, we have to make do depending upon your ability to withstand the cold and the rain, what have you. The Talmud already says if it gets so bad, the rain really is falling down and you can't stay in, then you go inside your house. Interestingly enough, it says also if it gets so hot, you're allowed to go into your house. And when I lived in El Paso, Texas, I actually experienced that one time. Okay. Here's more question of cold. And what it really comes to do is because you're supposed to eat your meals and ideally sleep in the sukkah. 7 days, you're supposed to live in the sukkah. Bring out your Shabbos candles. You'll light the candles for Shabbat or for Yom Tov in the sukkah. Have your meals. Do whatever you're going to do in the sukkah. So ideally, that is what you do. Now, I sent out some photos that I'm going to just take it. I don't. If you got them, take a look. That's all right. You don't. The second half of it was Sukkot. Yeah, there's a very nice. The first one was very fancy, beautifully decorated. You got the table and chairs and the tablecloth and all kinds of things in there. Then on the next one, you have a sukkah on a balcony. How do you know if a neighborhood in Israel was planned to be a Orthodox observant community or not? How can you know by looking at because most people live in apartments there, condos, if you wish. How do you know which one was designed for the more traditional minded versus the more secular minded?
Oh,
What about the balconies? Everybody's got a balcony.
they're covered.
What?
There's a
The long fences.
Yes.
And it's color staggered so that the roof isn't covered.
Exactly. The balconies are staggered. So because the sukkah must be open to the wind, to the air. to the sky. If you build a sukkah under a roof, it's not a kosher sukkah. So in Israel, because they do have in mind what kind of community sometimes that they're building for, they do change. But if it's going, you can see by the design of the balconies that if it's designed for a more religious community versus a not so religious community by the balconies. So the sukkah has to be open to the sky. You can't have tree branches over it, so you got to be careful in terms of that. But everything else, what you put inside it, how you decorate it, all of that, depending on your kids, grandchildren, the various creatures that come into the sukkah during the night. So on one of the third pages of the sukkahs is a picture of a community where the balconies are staggered. You'll see no balcony is completely directly over another one. So at least enough space for people to be able to sit under the stars. Okay, so that is the Sukkot. There are places where they will put an awning over the Sukkot. When it's nice, the awning comes up, the sukkah is open. If it starts to rain, the awning comes down and protects the sukkah. I've been in houses in which they have a breezeway, usually connecting for the main part of the house to the garage, and the roof comes off, and there's a bamboo there all year long, and that becomes their sukkah. Right? There are a lot of details about the sukkah we're not going to go into, but as long as it's big enough for you to sit inside, that is the minimum size for the sukkah. There, even nowadays, they have portable sukkot. This it's like one of these toys. You got the tunnels that they have for kids. Only this, you stand it up. It's got a little doorway, and you have a little bamboo mat they put on the top, and you got your sukkah. You go downtown Toronto, you have to eat, so you go outside into the park there near your office building, set up your sukkah, eat, take it down, and go back to your office. Okay. All right, so that is the major element that people, which the holly gets its name from. Now, the other part, which is a little more difficult to explain, is the lulav and the etrog. We'll start with the etrog first. The etrog is a fruit. The English name is citron. And the only thing that I know that it's used for is by Jews for the holiday of Sukkot. I don't know of any other use that it has in this day and age. Okay. And the whole idea about performing a mitzvah, when we do a mitzvah, we're supposed to do it as nicely as possible. Right? So, for example, a tallis. You shouldn't just have an old rag for your tallis, your prayer shawl. It should be a nice garment. There are lulavim and etrogim have their beautiful qualities. The etrog ideally is yellow with no blotches, no spots. It has a more narrow shape, kind of egg-shaped like quality to it. At the end is what we call in Hebrew the pitum. The pitum is where the flower was. Ideally, the pitum should be there, or it makes it no longer kosher. If there's a hole in the etrog, if there are too many brown spots on it, it becomes less usable, or it may be even no longer usable. And when people go out to buy the lulav and etrog, here, for the most part, they're usually getting a set from wherever they're purchasing it. And the price is really based upon the quality of the etrog. The better aesthetic of the etrog, the higher the price. So $60 to $80 Canadian is just going to get you the bare minimum. All right? You want to spend $300-400 on an etrog? It's not my thing, but all right, you can do that. If you go in the right areas in town, you see that here too. You will see sometimes you will find people with those jeweler glasses, a little thing that they wear to look at the diamond, make sure it's perfect. You'll see some guys, one of those things, looking at the etrog to make sure there are no holes in it that they're missing. So the etrog should be yellow. It should be kind of long and narrow. Should be able to hold it in one hand. Okay. All right, that's part one. That's the etrog. Part two is the lulav. The lulav is a palm branch, date palm branch, before it opens. If you look at date palms, you usually see these fronds out there, right? It's all spread out like that. The lulav that we use for the holiday is before it opens up. Again, there's a certain degree of brown stuff on the inside of it that's naturally comes with it, that flies off from people's hair and everything when you're waving it. But the central spine should be as straight as possible. Ideally, the central spine ends with one leaf that's doubled over, connected completely. All right? And the better that is, the better quality the lulav will be. Then we have what are called hadassim, myrtle. Hadassim are myrtle. They have to have 3 leaves that come together. When you look at the myrtle branches that are sold for the hadassim, for the lulav and etrog, they are made up of a series of 3 leaves, all connecting together at the same point on the branch. Right? So you have to have 3 of those. And the fourth element is the aravot, willows. Not every willow qualifies, but there's certain willows that do. My son managed to root it one year. And so in my house that we just left this summer, there's a nice willow tree. Don't tell anybody, but that's what I was using for my willows the last number of years, plus the ones I got. So now what happens? So we take these 4 elements, the etrog, the lulav, the 3 hadassim, the 2 willow branches. They're usually put into a holder. The holder is made out of leaves from one of the palm trees, although some insist upon not using those holders. My youngest son does that. And then during the course of the holiday, we will take these elements and they will be used as part of the ceremony. My father of blessed memory never liked Sukkot because of this. He thought it was a lot of mumbo jumbo, magic, call it, these kind of stuff. So of course he died during Sukkot. But essentially, if we look at it as an agricultural celebration, we look at it by the fact in the land of Israel, there is clearly a dry season and a wet season. It almost never, not never is never said, but almost never rains during the summer months in Israel. If it's going to rain, it's in the autumn through the winter and early spring. So it ushers in the time of rain. And when we take the willow branch and the myrtle branch and the palm branch, and along with the fruit of the etrog, and we wave them, the sound kind of reminds you of the rain falling on a tree. And it's a symbolic act asking for God's blessing for the upcoming year, for rain, for water, when it's needed in the agricultural world. It's a very, farmers really understand how important the elements are. It has to rain at a certain time of year to grow the crops. It better not rain at another time of year if you want to harvest the crops. If you get too much rain, you can't plant. If you get too little rain, it won't grow. So one of the things that we miss living in the world in which we live today is that connection to nature. And that's part of what Sukkot does. Putting us in the Sukkah, putting us out into the elements. We're subject to the elements around us. Using the lulav and etrog as a symbol of the hope for rain in the upcoming agricultural season, we connect that way with what's going to take place. And indeed, at the end of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, the next to last day of the whole 8 days, we start changing part of the liturgy, and we add the words into the daily, the Amidah, the silent prayer that we say 3 times daily and 4 times on Shabbat. Mashiv haruach morida geshem, causes the winds to blow and the rains to fall. And since the origins are in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, we tie these all to the land of Israel. Obviously, in Toronto, it rains throughout the year. In Toronto, the seasons are different. But nonetheless, our prayers go and are directed towards the land of Israel, and we assume God can figure out we're not there and give us the rain when we need it here and when we don't. Okay, so what do? So most people, although some do it in the sukkah before they come to the synagogue, first day of Yom Tov and the second day, if it's not Shabbat. Just like we don't use the shofar on Shabbat, we do not wave the lulav and etrog on Shabbat. So this year, the first day of the holiday, we won't wave the lulav and etrog. So this year, it'll start on the second day. Once again, that's a rabbinic ruling. The rabbis said you can't do it because they're afraid you're going to carry it out in the public domain. So the custom for most people is the following. You have your lulav, the back of the lulav, the spine is towards you. On the right are the 3 hadassim, the 3 myrtle branches. On the left are the 2 aravot, the 2 willows. You pick up the etrog with the pitum pointing down. And then we say the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu on the tilat lulav. Then we take the etrog and turn it upright so that pitum is on top, and we wave it 3 times in front of us towards the east. If we're standing in the synagogue, this is the normal. There are different customs, but this is the norm to practice. 3 times east, 3 times south, 3 times west, 3 times north, 2 times up, 3 times up, and 3 times down. So we have the major points of the compass, up and down, as a symbol of asking for God's blessings throughout the world. Then, right after that in the synagogue, we have the Shacharit service, the morning service, which is very similar to the Rosh Hashanah service, but much shorter. That is followed by what is called the Hallel. The Hallel is a recitation of a number of psalms that were selected by the rabbis, which includes in it several passages in which we ask, again, we turn to God for blessing. We have the refrain, Ki le'olam chasdo. I can't get the first 3 words out at the moment. And Hodu, we say, the cantor will sing, the Chazan will do Hodu, Hashem Ki To 3 times, Ki 3 times, Leolam 3 times, Hasdo. And the congregation repeats it after him. But depending upon the synagogue, some just say Ki Leolam Hasdo passage, or some repeat what he says, depending upon the synagogue and their practice. And then again, we have a section where we say, Anna Hashem Hoshiana, please, O Lord, save us now. And we wave the lulav and etrog all the directions, breaking it up in that way. Okay. Then at the end of the service, we have what are called Hoshanas. That's a nice English word, Hoshanas. Hoshanot. We circle the synagogue. Traditionally, the reader's table is more in the middle of the room. And so we circle around the synagogue, around that table, depending how many people are there, how many have lulav netrog, and the crowd, you make a circuit around the synagogue. That is an imitation of what took place in the temple. We know that in the temple in Jerusalem, they had each day of the holiday, they had a procession, only they used willow branches, long willow branches. So each day of the holiday, again, except for Shabbat, we chant these special prayers in which we ask God's blessings for agriculture, God's blessing for the year, all kinds of various aspects to it. And we say the words Hoshiana. Some of you may recognize it as Hosanna or Hoshana. It's an interesting question how it is that in the New Testament, when Jesus is supposed to be coming into Jerusalem just before Passover, they're there with their lulav branches saying Hoshana, because that belongs with Sukkot, not Pesach. So I don't know how the scholars of the New Testament deal with that. It's not my expertise. But Hoshana is merely the Anglicization through Latin, the Vulgate, of Hoshiana. Hoshia, save us, please. That's what Hoshiana means. Okay? And so each day of Sukkot, we will do that. The last day of Sukkot itself is called Hoshana Rabbah. It's the last day of the 7 days, first 7 days. We circle 7 times. The service is much longer. We do extra psalms. It's more like a Shabbat service in that way. Weekdays, we do the same thing, only once. But on Hoshana Rabbah, we do it 7 times and recite more passages, and we take another set of willow branches and beat them. Again, it's the sound of the rain hitting is what I believe is the object behind it. Okay? So Sukkot has these 7 days. First 2 days in outside the land of Israel are Yom Tov fully. The intermediate days are called Chol Shemoed or Chol HaMoed, which means the weekday of the holiday. How much work, what kind of work one does during that time depends on one's livelihood, all kinds of other things. Ideally, one shouldn't work. Realistically, most people have to work. So there are different customs that people follow during those times, but it's not the full restriction of a Yom Tov. Also, we're told in the Talmud, Mishnah and Talmud, that they had special celebrations during the holiday of Sukkot that are not found in the Bible, not mentioned in the Bible. It's called Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the rejoicing and the drawing of the water. We know, at least in the Second Temple period, it became the custom that water, each of the intermediate days of Sukkot, was brought from Gihon springs to the temple precincts. And then the priest would pour water on the altar, a water libation. Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the rejoicing of this water. And the rabbi said, if you've not seen Simchat Beit HaShoeva, you have not seen real joy, real rejoicing. Talks about lighting lamps and lighting candles and fires that were in the temple, and then the light was spread throughout the city. Everybody was there. And there are a couple of elements to it that are interesting for various reasons. One, we are told, and Josephus also records this, that one of the high priests at that time was a Sadducee. There's a whole, during that period of time, we're talking about 130 BCE until the destruction of the temple in around the year 70 of the Common Era. There were various groups in the Jewish people. One group were known as the Essenes or Essenes, and they kind of withdrew, and the community of Qumran may have been an Essene community. A lot of the scholars who came from Catholic background wanted to identify them as being a monastic order because they saw what they wanted to see. We don't know, but they had their own special rituals, and they were not happy with what took place in the temple, thought it was, it went to pot. All right. Then you had a group which was called the Pharisees, who are the bad guys in a good part of the New Testament, but there are good guys because that's the origin of the rabbinic traditions. Then you had the Sadducees, Saddukim. The Sadducees mostly came from the priestly families, and they probably had most control over the temple for most of the time. The rabbis' traditions differ with that, but we do have more evidence that the rabbis are kind of reading into it a little bit from what it really was. But we have, as I said, we have recorded that one of these Sadducean priests, unhappy with this pouring of water on the altar, which is not mentioned in the Bible, and he poured it at his feet instead of on the altar. And so everybody was there. They didn't have rotten tomatoes in their hands, but they did have esrogim. And they threw their etrogim at the high priest when he did that, to say that was a no-no. Okay, so that's one aspect that's important. A second, which becomes a real saga of its own, especially in the modern era, was that we know that the sexes didn't mingle that much together in the ancient world. Generally speaking, women of repute, anyway, were expected to be mostly at home. But sometimes they had to go to the temple for various reasons. And we were told that everybody gathered at the outer courtyard of the temple, the Ezrat Nashim. It's called the women's court because women could come there. And the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, a real joyous time. It's sort of like New Year's Eve on Times Square. And so it says the rabbis weren't happy with what was going on. So they tried putting the women inside and the men outside. That didn't work. They put the men inside, the women outside. That didn't work. So they built a balcony. The women went on the balcony and the men were below. Most Orthodox poskim, disciples of Jewish law, insist that that's the origin of the mechitza in the synagogue, that the sexes were segregated during that time. But what is clear is the rest of the year they weren't. But because of the mass gathering and everything, that's was noted there, and that's used by, as I said, most Orthodox poskim, most Orthodox disciples of Jewish law, to say that sexes must be segregated during worship because of distraction, not being able to keep your mind on your prayers, etc. Although generally speaking, when I see her, the men are busy talking just as much, and the women are busy talking half the time. So, but it's not the men talking to the women. That's the I don't know what difference that makes, but anyhow. So, all right, so that's the first 7 days of Sukkot. The 8th day is called Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly. It has a separate distinctive name. The sacrifice was different. Oh, I got to come back to the sacrifices in a minute. But it has no special element to it. It's sort of like tacked on in the end, it would seem, almost. Okay. But it got added impetus by having that was the day that the prayer for rain was recited. The ark is open, Torahs are taken out, and we pray for the upcoming year, Mashiv HaRuach U'Merida Geshem, that the winds should blow and the rain should fall. So that gives an extra push to that day. You're really not supposed to eat in the sukkah on that day because it's an extra day after the holiday. Talk to your rabbi about the night before. I'm not going to. All right. And they're also marching around the synagogue Hoshanas, but not with a little of an etrog, that take place on Shmini Atzeret. Now, at some stage of history in Babylonia, the Jewish community was in Babylonia, it became the accepted custom to start the cycle of the Torah reading with the first Shabbat after Shmini Atzeret. The first Shabbat after Shmini Atzeret, we read the first few chapters of Genesis, the Sefer Bereshit. And so it was their custom that the last chapters of the book of Deuteronomy were read on the second day of Shmini Atzeret, and was called Simchat Torah, the rejoicing of the Torah. So at night, and again in the morning, we take Torah scrolls out, we dance around the synagogues. Different customs, some 3, some 5, are called up for the only time we read the Torah scrolls in the evening to read from the book of Deuteronomy, the closing chapters. Again, the next morning, march around, sing, dance, have a hullabaloo for a few hours, depending upon the synagogue. And then again, we read from the Torah. Many synagogues have different ways of handling it. Some have mass aliyot, groups of people come up for each aliyah. Some have Torahs being spread all over the place, and they have individual aliyot to the Torah, where it traditionally it's only men, where women have it in those synagogues. However, the synagogue does it, men and women together, separate, whatever they do. There's even a special aliyah that's tacked on for all the kids, called Hana'arim. So the children are invited to come up to say the blessing for the Torah reading, and usually give a big talis that's held over their heads. And so however many times the last few passages have to be read, it goes over and over and over again. Then one individual is given the title Chatan Torah, the honorific of the groom of the Torah. Usually it's a special honor that is bestowed upon someone for however the synagogue determines that honor. There's can be a very long calling up that the Chazan will chant for this person to come up, comes up. He's given the honor of the last aliyah, the last words of the book of Deuteronomy. When that is done, another individual is called up, a second Torah, which is already rolled to Genesis, because you don't have to roll it back and forth if you can help it. He is called Chatan Bereshit, the groom of Genesis, of Bereshit. And he is given the honor of having the first aliyah, which goes through the creation story of Genesis 1 in the beginning of chapter 2. So that's Torah number 1. Torah number 2. A third Torah is taken because we have a special reading on every holiday. Rosh Hashanah, remember, we had the Rosh Hashanah reading, and then we had the extra Maftir Torah. We have an extra Maftir Torah for the holiday of Simchat Torah, which is really the same as the day before, Shmini Atzeret's reading. But what is also unique is that the reading from the prophets on Simchat Torah is the opening chapter of the book of Joshua. So what we do is we finish the Torah, we start the Torah again, and to show the connection with the rest of the Tanakh, the rest of the Hebrew Bible, we start reading the very next book in the Bible, the book of Joshua. So all this is part and parcel of that celebration of Simchat Torah. On Yom Kippur, as you will see on Monday, and on Shmini Atzeret, and on the last day of Pesach, and on the second day of Shavuot, which is the same as last day of Shavuot, we also have the Yizkor prayers. The Yizkor prayers are recited on behalf of our relatives who passed away, at least one's parents and grandparents. Traditionally, this is said by their children. Some synagogues still have a custom that if your parents are alive, you don't stay in for the Yizkor service. Some insist you should stay. Each synagogue has its own practice. And we remember our loved ones on those days. It's not on Simchat Torah because there's too much joy involved with it. However, in Israel, which now also follows the Babylonian custom of reading the Torah in a one-year cycle, Shmini Atzeret has Yizkor and Simchat Torah and the prayer for rain all in the same day. You go up and down. It's not so simple, easy in terms of that. Now, there are a couple other interesting things I want to point out about Sukkot. All of the holidays have korbanot, sacrifices. And there are various discussions of different rabbis on how we understand the sacrifices, what they're supposed to mean, how they're to be interpreted, what have you. But what is significant is that on Sukkot, there's a certain number of sacrifices that goes down each day. The number decreases. And when you add up the total of those sacrifices, they total 70, those particular ones, those animals. Rabbinic tradition has it. There are 70 languages in the world. There are 70 nations in the world. Those 70 sacrifices are for all of the peoples of the world. It's a very beautiful idea because, Jews and non-Jews didn't always get along so well, so it's nice to have a nice thing in there. Right? And Shmini Atzeret is a different day and it's for Israel to stay around. The other nations have been here, they had their sacrifices. You, my children, you stay around for another day with me, God says. Right? That's one thing. It's interesting to note that there's a discussion about the proper way of celebrating Hanukkah. We aren't there yet, but there's a dispute between the school of Hillel and Shammai. As you like, we're going to ignore the extra candle for the moment. We'll talk more about it when we talk about Hanukkah. Do you start with one candle the first night, 2 the second, 3, 4, 5, until you get to 8? Or do you start with 8 and you decrease? 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The school of Hillel says, no, we always go up in high sanctity. We always want more to do better. Shammai, the school of Shammai, references these sacrifices from Sukkot that began with 14 and went down. in number. Why? Because the fact of the matter is, Sukkot was seen in the Jewish mind as the holiday par excellence. When the rabbis of Talmud say Chag, which means holiday, normally they're talking about Sukkot. I mentioned Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the rejoicing that goes on Sukkot time. And I included in that email to you besides all these nice pictures of Luvan etrogs, some pictures. One is of the first one is a synagogue floor, a mosaic. It has the 7-branch menorah, not the Chabad style, and with the stand, 3-legged stand, and a shofar and a lulav branch. Then on a series of coins that are also in that email, there are coins from the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Bar Kokhba revolt takes place around the year 132 through 135 of the Common Era. We'll talk about history later on, but Bar Kokhba revolt against Roman rule, and the Romans were more harsh, even they had been before that time when the temple was destroyed. Coins were issued, and it was a call back to what used to be, good old days. So that the Hebrew letters that were used was the old Hebrew alphabet that predates the alphabet that we know today. Plus, the symbol used on the Bar Kokhba coins, who were in revolt, celebrating freedom, was the lulav. And similarly, other coins on the next page of that, 133, 134, the Common Era, has the temple in one side, and the other side has, obviously, it's supposed to be lulav and etrog. So lulav and etrog symbolized freedom in many ways for the Jewish people. That is perhaps why, and again, we'll talk more about it. How many days is Sukkot with the extra day, biblically? 8. How many days is Hanukkah? 8. Talk about that more in Hanukkah time. But it's possible, again, remember when I mentioned the idea of Hoshana, if indeed, whatever the evidence of which gospel it is, I don't recall, with Jesus coming into town with the people waving the lulav. One thing is clear. When Jesus is crucified, the Romans put on the cross, King of the Jews. Right? Mashiach, Messiah, that's the role of the Messiah, to be the king. Anyone who revolted against Rome, anyone who tried to appoint a king without permission of the Roman powers was guilty of revolt from Rome. One of the penalties for that was crucifixion. But if, in the minds at least of some people, again, we don't know all the historical details of the New Testament, if some of the people believed that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah, he would be the king who would free the Jewish community from Roman rule, which fits in with the idea of the lulav as a symbol of Jewish independence. One more thing, and then I'll call it an evening. We say there are 4 elements to the lulav and etrog. Some see them as representing the elements of a person. The etrog is the heart. the lulav at the spine. I believe the tradition is that the hadassim are the eyes, and there are both the willows of the mouth, lips. And you can kind of see how that would figure in. Another, even I think a nicer interpretation, is it represents the qualities of all Jews. Some Jews are like the willow. No aroma, no fruit, nothing. They're empty of mitzvot. Some are like the myrtle, has a fragrance, an aroma. Okay? Some kinds of mitzvot. Some are like the lulav, because the lulav is from the date tree. There's no aroma to the lulav, but there are the tasty dates. And some Jews are like the etrog, both fruit and aroma. Those who fulfill everything. But you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of taking the lulav and etrog unless all four elements are there. It's only when all of Israel is united as one that we can properly observe the holidays. So you need everybody. No one should be left out. Okay, so I hope you'll have an opportunity, besides dieting very heavily on Yom Kippur, to celebrate Sukkot, and we'll talk about some more things next week. Any questions? Anything tonight? Yes.
Quick question. So, do I understand it correctly that Sukkot is really a very elaborate rain dance?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, you can call it a rain dance. Like I said, my father, bless his memory, would kind of think of it like that. But just like the shofar is praying through a horn and not through words, waving the lulav and etrog is praying using agricultural elements and not words. So we call it elaborate rain dance. Nothing wrong with that. The rabbis say the world is judged on Sukkot for rain. Okay, anything else? Anybody else? Okay, Gemar v'chatima tova. Gemar, an end. Chatima, sealing. It's sealing in the book. Tova, good one. Gemar v'chasima tova, Gemar v'chatima tova. Have a good, easy fast, and see everybody next time. Okay, good night, everybody.